All right, so like I said, we're going to be talking about the massage effects of the body, and we'll take a look at the massage application strokes and exactly what they're going to be doing for the body. So pretty much, we're just going to overview it all and see how it ties together. So the first thing we really want to understand is the exact effects that we're producing in the body with massage, right? And so let's break those down into different categories. We have what's called mechanical effects, as well as physiological or reflexive effects, and then psychological effects. So, what exactly is the difference between all of these? Well, mechanical effects are the effects that occur based off of physical force. So, even if we performed these techniques, or if these universal forces affected a non-organic, you know, entity, these mechanical forces, mechanical effects are still going to happen. So think like if I squeeze a toothpaste tube, this toothpaste is going to come out, right? So mechanical effects are the byproducts that the physical forces of our techniques produce in the body. And the easiest example, and we'll look at others, is that when we press into the body or press onto the skin, right, we can alter the circulation of blood physically, right? We can push the blood through the veins in the system, or we can literally press in and occlude the blood from actually passing through the blood vessels. So reflexive effects, also known as physiological effects, are how our bodily systems change in response to massage. So we call these physiological responses because, well, it pertains to our physiological systems. We can call them reflexive effects or responses because think of like a reflex as a natural reaction to a stimuli. So these are physiological or reflexive effects that are caused by massage. And so essentially, our physiological function changes in response to massage intervention. So the easiest example, and there's tons of them, would be like the change in blood pressure, change in heart rate, and of course, just ultimately activation of the parasympathetic nervous system. And then psychological effects are changes in mental state. Now, some of the psychological effects we'll take a look at and mention, you could probably argue are more physiological or reflexive by nature because, I mean, technically, yes, the altering of the neurotransmitters and other hormones in the body can change mood and our mental state, but we'll have it in its own separate category. But we can also say that, better states of well-being or just overall sense of enjoyment, happiness, and reduction of stress, depression, and anxiety is what we would summarize into the psychological effects. So let's take a look at some of these mechanical forces. So these are universal forces. These are forces you would find in a physics textbook, right? So, of course, our massage techniques can produce these forces, and these forces have various effects. So we can have what's called torsion or rotational forces, which is where an object would spin on a surface and then would generate heat and other things. So an easy example, a real life example would be if you've ever seen the survival shows where the people use like a bow drill and they spin like a little tiny dowel and it generates heat eventually and ultimately hopefully makes you a fire. That would be a rotational force. Shearing force is where one structure or two structures rub and slide against each other. So for instance, if you're cold, right, you rub your hands together much like that, that's going to generate heat as well. Then we have compressive force, which is going to be different than our compression as a technique, but compressive force is where we exert pressure onto an object, and typically this is done within at a 90-degree angle to the surface. And then we also have tensile force, which is where a structure can be pulled apart and have tension placed within the, usually the center or, wherever the most, crux of the pull is placed. So then we can also have bending forces, which, is kind of a combination of several others, because a bending force is where you're going to have compression on two ends of a structure, and then you're going to have a stretch at the apex of that, particular object. So think like if I took a pencil and crushed it, it'd eventually start bending with the compressive force in there. And then of course the pencil is going to snap, but maybe a metal rod would be a little bit better, right? Because that would bend. But of course, in the sense of skin, right, we can just take the skin and bend it much like this. So those are our mechanical forces, right? These are the natural phenomenons that our massage techniques are producing, which now let's take a look at the grand total of effects. So as we said, we have the mechanical effect category, the physiological or reflexive category, and the psychological category as well. Now, for the sake of study, I want to highlight the fact that we have three different categories, and two of those categories are significantly smaller than the other. So in a case like this, if all three of these categories equal the sum total, this is where you see the percentages next to these boxes. If all three of these categories equal the master set of massage effects, then to save yourself on having to learn everything and differentiate everything all at once, if you remember the easier columns or sets, then you inadvertently remember the larger or harder to remember set. So if we were to say pay attention more to what's in the mechanical and psychological category, we can just safely assume that anything else that is an effective massage, as long as you realize that it's an effective massage, which after this video you should, would then belong in the physiological category. So let's take a look at the simplicities first. So mechanical effects. Now, the first thing I want to point out is that when you look at this graph, this flow chart here, mechanical forces cause physiological change. Now, granted, there's still ways to cause physiological change without physical or manual application, right? I'm sure everybody's aware that ASMR is a big thing. Yes, sounds and other things of that nature can cause a physiological or sensory response. But for the sake of our hands-on application, these mechanical forces that we're producing with our massage techniques in turn cause physiological responses or changes in the body. So what exactly are mechanical forces? Well, like we said and mentioned before, the moving of blood or lymph fluid, right? We can physically force blood or lymph fluid out of an area, or we can physically stop blood or lymph fluid from flowing from an area with compressive force and in other various means. Now, of course, there is a reflexology, or a reflexive effect of this, where by stimulating the body, we can cause the blood vessels to dilate and cause vasodilation, which then in turn also increases blood flow, easily seen with, hyperemia to the surface of the skin, where we're increasing surface heat of the skin and causing blood flow to increase within the area. So then we can also generate heat. Generation of heat is a mechanical force, usually done with a friction-based technique or rotational technique, right? And that generation of heat in turn can lead to a physiological response, namely in the sense of inflammatory responses. But like I said, the generation of heat, these universal mechanical forces will occur even if we're not working on a human body, right? If you took two pieces of, two sticks together, right, and rub them together, right? These are non-living, these are non-organic things. You rub those sticks together, it generates heat, eventually causes fire, very similar in this fashion. Another mechanical force we can see is to also pull things apart or stretch, right? Obviously easily seen in the sense of actually stretching something, but we can see that some of our techniques are going to cause a tensile force and cause inadvertently a stretch effect. So let's look at the other easy category, the psychological effects. Of course, right, we can easily say we reduce anxiety, depression, and stress. Again, we might liken that towards a physiological response because it is a change in chemical natures of the body, but there's also mental processes going on with the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex and the way we process cognition and everything, right? So of course there's going to be also the better sense of well-being, right? You feel better taken care of. You feel better about yourself because of a massage. It's that self-care mentality. Then of course we can also create a safe, nurturing environment, which creates just a sense of ease and content. We'll look at more psychological effects later on as well. So the physiological effects are, as you can see, more numerous, and there's plenty more to list than there is here. And we'll have all the systems to look at and pretty much list our reflexive effects in that nature. But just to name a few, we have changes in blood pressure, we have changes in heart rate, decreases in respiratory rate. Of course, by stimulating the nervous system, we can cause a lot of change, such as reduction in pain. We can deactivate sensory reception in the nervous system, right? We can increase inflammatory markers, vasodilation, right? And then ultimately, a lot of what we would say is the benefits of massage comes down to this little bullet point right here, which is engaging the parasympathetic nervous system. So when we look at the parasympathetic nervous system and what it's responsible for and what it activates and what it regulates in the body, a lot of our benefits align with that. So we'll take a look heavily at that and then any specificities outside of there. So here is just a brief table that just kind of depicts what forces our techniques perform or produce, right? So as you can see, Effleurage and Petrissage are pretty much big staples and go-tos in the massage arsenal. And for good reason, apparently here, because they can produce so many various forces, which then can cause so many various effects in the body. So now just because a technique can produce one type of force doesn't mean it's the greatest at producing that force. As you can see, Effleurage does produce a tensile force, right? If I glide across my skin, you can see that there's tension in one side of the skin, right? You can see that there's bending in this part of the skin, and of course there's compressive force and so on and so forth. But that tensile force produced by that Effleurage is nowhere near in comparison to the tensile force produced by an actual stretch. So there is varying degrees of mechanical force and effect between the various techniques, but as you can see, this is just a breakdown of what they all, and we're not going to take time to go through all of them. You can just take a look at this and kind of, postulate on your own how these are all produced, right? After basically explaining, the previous slide of effects or forces. So let's take a look at the specificities or the specific techniques and what exactly they do for the human body. So Effleurage and its effects. Well, first and foremost, Effleurage, like we said, can really affect the circulation of the body. Now, of course, this is both a mechanical and reflexive in nature, right? Because like we said, the physical mechanical force of pushing blood or lymph out of the area will obviously move the blood and lymph. But as we said, there is a reflexive effect in which vasodilation will occur, which then, increases the rate of flow of blood. And then, of course, lymph as well. So relaxation is, again, a reflexive effect, which we could also say psychological too, right? Because of the stimulation of the nervous system, which can then trigger the parasympathetic response of the autonomic nervous system, can reduce muscular tension. It can reduce stress levels in the body, stress hormones in the body. So, and we'll take a look at some of the other systems that we'll explain a little bit too, where, you know, relieving muscular tension also is, there's some studies to show that that actually increases relaxation in patients as well. Pain relief as well. You know, there's a lot to pain relief, right? Pain is such a unique phenomenon, but you know, one of the quickest ways to explain the pain relief is the fact that, one, massage itself will sort of, you know, retard the nervous system receptors to a degree, right? And that it can decrease nervous system stimulation after prolonged exposure to a technique. But one particular justification we have for relieving of pain is the masking of painful signals with non-painful signals. So what we call masking nociceptive pain or signals, right, with non-nociceptive signals. So basically masking pain signals with non-pain signals. And so this is based off of the theory, gate control theory proposed by Meldeck and Wall, that when we stimulate an area that is innervated by the same nerve root, but where the pain is localized, then all these sensory signals, right, are going to be going to the same route, which then essentially causes a traffic jam. So pain travels at a very slow and continuous rate. And so let's say that if I had pain right here, and it's only this one little local spot, if I rub this entire area, I'm activating so many different receptors in such a larger area, and those sensations travel faster than the painful signals, so they're going to get to the nerve root faster than the pain signals, and that the nerve root can only perceive so much sensation or receive so much input at a time. It essentially crowds out that pain. Now, of course, there's other justifications for pain relief, but those are just to name a few. Of course, we can also look at the improved mental health, right, which is a psychological benefit. Like we said, as we reduce stressors in the body and engage the parasympathetic nervous system, right, it creates this sense of heightened sense of well-being, you know, just overall better mental health and clarity. We'll take a look at a few of the neurotransmitters responsible for that, such as dopamine and serotonin, right? But I mean, effleurage is a great technique in all of these cases. Now, what we might see is that a lot of those other benefits kind of continue on through the rest of the techniques. So, for instance, the you know, relaxation, pain relief, stuff like that is usually pretty unanimous amongst all of our techniques. But taking a look at Petrissage, one of the main benefits of Petrissage is that we can reduce muscle tone and muscle tension with it. So the kneading action can help to, you know, essentially loosen up, break down the muscle tissue, help to break down the connective tissue as well, which in theory, you know, reduces the adhesions between the areas and tissues, and, you know, ultimately relieves the tension and discomfort in the muscles as well. So again, this would be a reflexive effect, right? It might have some mechanical components, but it's largely reflexive. So think like if you were to tenderize some meat, right? If you had a steak, which you shouldn't eat steak, but you would pound it, and that's going to soften it up, right? So the squeeze kneading is going to soften up the muscle tissues. So our next thing is increased tissue elasticity. So this again is also a reflexive effect, but this massaging, this squeezing and manipulating technique here known as Petrissage will essentially give the tissues like a sense of durability, right? And will keep them healthier and allow them to, you know, move towards boundaries of their limits and elasticities, and then helps to improve the functionality of their elasticity as well, which then can lead to greater mobility, greater range of motion, and just overall reduction in tension and pain as well. Of course, the grasping, squeezing, and lifting motions of Petrissage can create circulation effects as well, much similar to the Effleurage. And then, of course, we have pain relief, right? If you're sitting at your desk and your shoulders are hurting, you just grab and squeeze like, right? It's pretty instinctual. That Petrissage is a good pain reliever. Just squeezing on a muscle usually feels pretty good. Compression. So compression is a wonderful technique in many cases. Now, again, compression as a technique is different from compressive force, right? Because compression as a technique is where we just press in and hold, or we can press in and lift and press in and lift. We call that ischemic or static compression if we press and hold. And then we have rhythmic compression or intermittent compression if we press, release, press, release, press, release. So reduced muscle tension and tone. Now, this is usually in response to the static or ischemic compression, where we press into a muscle or a structure, and with that sustained compression, reduces the tension in the muscle, or in this case, it's usually more effective or in response to a muscle spasm or cramp. So a particular technique is called approximation. Approximation is where when a muscle is in spasm, we place that muscle in passive contraction, right? Because we don't want an active contraction because that might aggravate the spasm more. But if the therapist passively places the ends of the muscle into a contracted state, that's going to shorten the muscle, which is going to make the muscle happier and potentially lead to less pain in your client, because that's what the spasm wants to do. It wants to contract, it wants to get shortened. So you put that muscle into a shortened state, press into the cramp, and then slowly relax out. So there's a lot of postulated reason why just pressing into a spasm, tight, or tense part of a muscle relieves it. But the easiest thing we can say is that de-excitation of the nerves in that area. So we have these neurological laws like Schultz and Davies laws and stuff like that, where stimuli can cause in a sense a retardation or degradation of the nervous system and the receptors itself. So by pressing in, right, we can cause changes in blood flow as well. We can either pump blood into the area, we can stop blood from flowing into the area, we can de-excite the nerves with the compression, and that could lead to the reduction in the muscle tone. So of course we can also change the circulation of the body. Like we said, we can either press and hold and stop the blood from flowing, or we can keep pumping with the the intermittent compression, which is then going to cause a pumping effect. Think like performing CPR, right? If you're doing chest compressions, that's going to cause air and blood to keep circulating into and throughout the body. Of course, compression's same thing, for pain relief, right? If by pressing onto certain areas, we can degrade the sensory receptors in there, deactivate those sensory receptors and reduce pain. Friction is a very interesting technique. I know that if you're in massage school, you've probably heard about friction a lot and to no end, and specifically about our good friend Cyriax, James H. Cyriax, and his friction, which is known as Cyriax friction or cross fiber friction. And the general summation is that this cross fiber friction is extremely beneficial and really designed for reducing the scar tissues and adhesions of the body and breaking down scar tissue and so on and so forth. Now, unfortunately, there's very little, almost to no evidence to support the claims about deep transverse friction being valid or effective at all. But we also have to consider too that it is extremely hard to empirically prove massage because of the dynamics behind it, where we're affecting the totality of a living organism, which makes it almost impossible to isolate variables and to really empirically observe on the atomic levels what's exactly happening. So while there is limited evidence to support this, we can use educational guessing and understanding of things to potentially justify these means. So, namely, the fact of the way that connective tissue, namely collagen and reticulin fibers as well, how they react to forces and stimuli. So collagen and reticulin will have properties, and connective tissue in general has properties known as thixotrophy, which is that in response to agitation and heat, can essentially go from a solid state to a liquid state. And based off of that, it would theoretically seem possible that if friction, which produces an inflammatory response, and a heat and generates heat, could essentially break down these tissues, which then could allow them to restructure and reorganize in a better, healthier manner, especially in the sense of reducing what we call adhesions between tissues, which an adhesion is where when we have a scar and we replace the scar tissue with new tissue in the name of collagen and other connective tissue fibers, it's like glue, right? If we just smear a big old splat of glue over the area to seal it up and regenerate, well, that glue can get stuck to other things, right? And then causes restrictions in those movements. So theoretically, it is possible, right, that we can essentially break down connective tissue through the means of friction based off of the properties that connective tissue has, and then assume that it would potentially help to realign and restructure. Of course, we can also increase inflammatory markers, right, by generating that heat and, causing irritation locally can increase inflammatory markers. Now, the theory is that, well, the inflammatory response in the body is part of the healing process. And so if we create this localized inflammation, then we could potentially be creating local areas of healing. So again, no way to exactly prove that, and there's very little evidence to support that friction techniques have improved the recovery rate of injuries, but it's easily enough to assume that it might be somewhat possible, but take it with a grain of salt. Now, for testing purposes, unfortunately, we do believe it to be quite true. Tapotement, a wonderful technique. Now, you either love it or hate it in a massage. Now, of course, I'm more of a sports massage therapist, so I typically use tapotement relatively often. But it is a very unique technique in the sense of what it does. So as you can see, there's two contradictory effects performed because of tapotement. We have increasing muscle tone, and we also have reducing or decreasing muscle tone. And so we think, well, how? So the nature of it is the fact of stimulation into relaxation. So what do I mean by that? Initially, when you apply tapotement, it causes a sort of alerting or alarming reaction into the muscle tissues, and which initially causes the muscles to tighten up and lock up and tone. So very light tapotement initially can cause an increase in the muscle tone within the muscle group. Now, conversely to that, if the stimulation of tapotement goes long enough, then that same alerting mechanism shuts off and then allows the muscles to relax. So stimulation in turn becomes relaxation if the stimuli is allowed to persist long enough to make it to that point. So think of it in the sense of like you were riding a roller coaster. And so the first time you got on the roller coaster and you looped around, right, you were super excited and super energized, your blood's pumping, your adrenaline's going, right? It was awesome, it was fun. So the cart comes to let you off, but instead of letting you off, it just goes again. It might still be fun and exciting the second time, but not as much. And let's just say after the 10th time you've ridden it, you're pretty well adjusted and acclimated to it, and it's just run of them. It's at that point, it's just life, right? And you're just looping around like, oh, here comes the turn. And, and then it's pretty much just nothing at that point. So the same kind of effect happens here. Now, why does that effect happen? Well, that boils down to proprioceptive mechanisms in the muscles themselves. Namely, we have the muscle spindle fibers, we have the Golgi tendon organ, and then around the joints, we have joint kinesthetic receptors as well, and that monitor the position of the joints, muscles, and everything else, right? So by rapidly causing these changes in the muscle state, right, namely length or, tension in the muscle, then that's going to cause those receptors to respond and react, which leads to the muscle tone and then eventually muscle relaxing, right? Where as we take a deeper look at those receptors, which we won't take right now, those are essentially their initial responses, their main jobs, and then their inverse functions performing alternatively. Now, we also see that we have joint mobilization. Again, same thing. If we were to apply Tapotement around the musculotendinous junctions and relatively close to joints, again, that affects the proprioceptive mechanisms and essentially like resets it, right? It just kind of restarts it, right? It definitely will think like if you hit a computer with a wrench, right, and the computer restarted, right? That's kind of what we're doing with the joint, which then in turn can lead to an increase the joint mobility. We can also find that there's decongestion in the lungs, right? So if we have something in the lungs, right, we pound on our chest, someone pounds on your back or whatever, right? If you start choking on water, they just come up and start smacking you like, please stop, right? But that is real, right? If you've ever been in the hospital and you have chest congestion, they actually have these little massaging devices that cause a lot of percussive motion into the chest, which can then break up the mucus. And so that, of course, is a mechanical effect, right? And physiologically, nothing really happened in response to that, at least in the sense to break up the congestion. Vibration. Vibration is a very interesting technique in the sense of there's quite a few variations to it. And some of them, massage therapists, we can perform some, but not all. So we usually have fine vibration, which is usually performed by massage devices such as like the Theraguns or the massage guns, especially depicted in this picture, or those little tchotchke things you get at Walmart to stuff into someone's stocking. We could also do other forms of vibration known as shaking, and more importantly, a subsection of shaking known as jostling, and then rocking. So taking a look at all three of those, because they will perform different effects in the body, the fine vibration can increase inflammatory markers. So I don't know if you've ever used these before, but if you have like one of those like massaging chairs where they have the little vibrating pads in them, after so much time of letting that thing vibrate on your skin, you ever get that itchy feeling? Well, that's actually that aggravation causes a histamic response, and histamines, usually are kind of itchy, which is why when bugs bite us, we get a little itchy, right? Because histamines build up to fight off any nastiness in the area, right? So the fine vibration in turn creates a localized response of inflammation, which theoretically could cause healing in the area potentially. As we can see, we can increase muscle tone and reduce muscle tone, very similar to the Tapotement effects as well. So this is namely in response to the shaking effects. More specifically, jostling is the most commonly used shaking effect in massage, which is where you take a large muscle group and then you shake the muscle group repeatedly. So again, just like with the Tapotement, the initial stimulation of that technique is going to cause the muscles to tighten up and tone, but after prolonged exposure to that stimulation, it then causes them to relax and deregulate. And then, of course, relaxation is caused by the rocking effect of the body. So namely through parasympathetic division activation through means of the vestibular system, through the vestibular apparatus in the ear, the inner ear fluid. So that gentle rocking motion that we create in our clients with our techniques is actually very relaxing, much similar to, you know, rocking a baby to sleep, or you know, just rocking in a rocking chair and getting down drowsy, right? So not every client can enjoy that effect. Some people have, you know, issues with balance in inner ear fluid, right, such as vertigo and other things. So, you know, do be mindful of that. Stretching is, again, a wonderful technique. You know, I list it as a massage technique because why not? We can, at least in Florida. I don't know if there's other states that disallow the use of stretching, but of course, joint mobilization, right? By stretching, we can increase the length of the muscle tissues and fascia, right? Now, of course, there's different types of stretching: dynamic stretching versus static stretching. Static stretching will eventually lead to an increase in tissue length, right? So these tissues, if they're exposed to that tensile force long enough, they're going to adapt, they're going to adopt the new state. Now, granted, this might be compounded over time, where initial gains of stretching, you know, are relatively short seen, you know, but over time we can increase the resting length of the tissues and fascia, which then, you know, increases range of motion and everything. Of course, we can improve the circulation in the body with this, namely especially the dynamic stretching, which is when you come into a stretch, you hold for a moment and then back out, in and out, which eventually causes that pumping mechanism of the body, especially the musculoskeletal pump, which is where the muscles contract and cause the blood to flow. And then, of course, stimulation of the various receptors in our body, such as the Pacini and Ruffini corpuscles, which detect stretch and deep pressure, and then have a very unique and intimate link to the parasympathetic response. By doing these deep stretches, we can activate those receptors and thus activate the parasympathetic response and feel nice and relaxed. So again, like we said, a lot of these effects and a lot of the benefits we see for the body are based off of the engagement of the parasympathetic nervous system. So real quick, the parasympathetic nervous system is also known as the craniosacral division because the roots of these nerves come from the brain, the brain stem, and then the sacral division of the spine. And what exactly happens during parasympathetic dominance? Well, first we want to understand that the parasympathetic response is known as the the rest and digest, or the feed and breathe response, which, if we can remember those, well, rest, you know, what happens when we're rest and relaxed, right? Everything's kind of calmed down. Digest, increasing digestive motility. Feed, right? More to do with the digestion. Breathe, right? Increases in reproductive activity. As opposed to the sympathetic response, which is known as our fight or flight. So if you were to think, if you were gearing up to defend yourself or run for your life, what are you doing, right? Well, your eyes are wide, you're taking in as much information, your breathing's increased, your heart rate's increased, right? These adrenaline is rushing through your body. You're going to have all these cocktails of hormones and everything. Your digestive system's going to shut off, right? Because it doesn't matter if I'm going to die in the next few minutes, then I don't care if I digest that cheeseburger. Again, my reproductive system's going to deregulate, and urinary function is going to deregulate because, you know, if I'm going to die immediately, do I have enough time to reproduce? Probably not. Hopefully I do. It might actually make the dying a little better, but who knows? So going back to the parasympathetic response, we see that the eyes kind of glaze over, right? Our pupils will constrict and not be so dilated. Salivation will increase, which again goes with the digestion. Our respiratory rate's going to decrease, and our sense of smell and hearing and everything are going to lower as well. So think like if you've ever been like really hungry, which is essentially a survival instinct, right? Our senses are a lot heightened. Our smell is better. Our sight is better, right? We can hear better. And think after you eat like a really big meal, right? After that big meal, like you kind of just like you kind of just fall into this little like mental hole, right? The sound is lowered, and your sense of smell and sight is like gone, and you know, you're just kind of delirious, right? So like we said, all of those senses are going to deregulate. Respiration is going to go down. Heart rate's going to go down. Blood pressure is going to go down. Adrenal function is going to reduce. Digestive motility is going to increase, right? Because now we need to digest and everything's nice and relaxed. Of course, urinary and reproductive functions are going to increase again as well. So like we said, essentially a lot of our benefits are just going to revolve around that. But let's take a look at some of the specifics. So namely, we'll start with the nervous system. Of course, like we said, we can decrease nervous system excitability, right? So nerves are, think like triggers, right? They're like responses and or alarms. And so if I were to ring your doorbell constantly, you would either shoot me at your doorstep, or you would just cut off the doorbell, or just ignore it, right? So kind of the same thing. If we constantly send signals or trigger responses and sensory receptors, then after so long, we just kind of override it, right? We get used to it and ignore it. Now, of course, there's other cognitive benefits, such as decreases in stress, depression, and anxiety, right? Again, we can say that's also more psychological in nature. This one's pretty interesting too. Influence the brainwave activity. Now, the largest evidence we've seen is that we've seen effects to alpha and beta waves. So alpha waves, which are usually associated with a more relaxed state, versus beta waves, we actually increase alpha waves and decrease beta waves, which inadvertently can lead to a relaxing response. Now, there's some studies that are kind of postulating about delta waves and the reduction of gamma waves, but a little more research has been shown in these brain waves themselves. So another justification of the relaxation response and psychological response as well. Again, of course, activation of the parasympathetic nervous system is a big one in itself as well. And then just general pain reduction through sensory perception, much similar to like we explained earlier with the gate control theory and how the nervous system works in regards to perceiving sensory input. So looking at the cardiovascular system, again, a lot of these benefits relate to the parasympathetic response, such as the reduction in blood pressure, but a lot of studies have showed that we have seen at least short-term reductions in systolic and diastolic blood pressure levels. So with that, we can also improve the circulation of the body, right? Now, going next to the next line to tie these two together, reducing arterial stiffness too. Some studies have shown that with regular massage, it essentially like tempers a lot of the tissues, like we've talked about with the connective and muscular tissue, but blood vessels as well, nerves as well, right? We can kind of temper these, right? Think like if I were to just leave a piece of leather, which again, don't wear leather, go make sure you don't hurt animals. If you leave a piece of leather in the sun and it just dries out and cracks, right, it's going to be bad, right? Same thing. If you just leave the body stagnant, it's just going to be rigid, right? So the massage kind of keeps the regularity and the elasticity to the body, so it can decrease arterial stiffness. It can affect the veins and health of the veins, so that everything is pumping and being utilized more efficiently. Some studies have shown, it's a little inconclusive of this, but that it can affect the heart rate. Well, one, we know it does lower the heart rate, but heart rate variations such as palpitations, right? There has been some postulated studies to suggest that there might be an influence on that with massage therapy. For the lymphatic system, right, of course, lymphatic drainage and the reduction of edema and lymphedema is a big thing, but some studies have shown that there is a localized and brief period of increased lymphocyte levels in the body during massage. Again, pretty inconclusive evidence, but something we can go off of. And another reason why massage can overall create a very healthy and healing environment. Now, with that as well, promotion of immune health and function because of other physiological means is that, again, if we can increase lymphocyte levels, we can increase better states of mental awareness and health, right? It all just kind of goes hand in hand. But the fact that we're also helping lymph to circulate a little bit better can lead to a better cleaning of the body in a sense, right? Now, granted, in healthy individuals, the lymphatic system is going to work plenty well, but those with compromised lymphatic systems could benefit a lot more in regards to that. The muscular system, right? The big one that we all look at because of massage therapists, we think we're muscle workers. In reality, we're actually nervous system workers, but because I mean, nothing's going to change or respond in the body without the nervous system say so. But anyways, taking a look at the muscular system, we can see that we affect the viscoelastic response, which then increases elasticity and reduces muscle tone. Viscoelastic response is the viscosity of the tissues and the cells and the elasticity around them as well. So both of those combined into one component, which muscles have those properties, right? We can actually, it's just like we said, if we temper the tissues with regular manual manipulation, right, that can lead to overall improvements of the tissue's health and then some. The potential to improve muscle recovery, again, very limited evidence on this, but it's postulated and some evidence to kind of suggest it's possible that by increasing circulation to the muscle tissues and the local tissues in the area, which gets rid of the metabolic waste and brings in more nutritious blood supply and things, right, could increase the recovery of muscles as well. Of course, going along with the reduction of muscle tone and the elasticity, we increase the range of motion in the joints and the muscle tissue as well. The next one we see is decrease in EMG electromyographic activity, which suggests increased muscle relaxation and decreased muscle fatigue. Again, not a whole lot of evidence to support that. And there's actually a lot of things that will decrease the EMG activity in muscles that aren't necessarily associated with relaxation, nor is decreased EMG activity associated with muscles being relaxed either. But it's almost a safe assumption that there is some degree of muscle relaxation based off of the EMG activity. And then, of course, the fact that massage does reduce EMG activity could suggest that it does help relax muscles, which can also lead to the other things, which is decreasing the pain, right, through activation of the parasympathetic nervous system and all that, right? Especially as we can see here, there's been lots of studies to show that deactivation of trigger points, whether you really believe in trigger points or not, the phenomenon's still there, right? Localized areas that are painful, or cramps in themselves too, or just relieving tensed muscles as well, has been shown that it's like a relief, right? It's that release. You're like, oh, thank God, that's done. And when that happens, it actually causes the parasympathetic response. So there is some merit to deactivating these trigger points or cramps or spasms or tensed areas of muscle tissue, whatever you want to wish to call them. And of course, there's lots of benefit to muscular related pathologies such as myofascial pain syndrome, cramps, spasms, tension related issues like headaches and others as well, as those are just muscular related issues. And then, as we've already seen with our techniques, they respond to that. The integumentary system, which by all accounts is essentially the means of which we cause all the change in the body. So first and foremost, the integumentary system is your largest sensory organ or organ system, right? So we're literally stimulating the largest sensory organ system, which everything we've seen and discussed regarding nervous system stimulation is just mediated through the skin, right? So we can almost use that first line to input everything else we've talked about. Now, some evidence to suggest that we can reduce the scarring after burns in the tissues there. So we do understand that the integumentary system is a combination of many layers of different tissues. We have epithelial tissue, connective tissue, more connective tissue, more connective tissue, and then muscular tissue eventually, right, where we have the epidermis, dermis, hypodermis or subcutaneous layer, superficial fascia, and then the muscles. So, which muscles aren't labeled as the integumentary system, if that needed to be said. But because of the properties of connective tissue and what we can do for the massage, such as in the name of, friction techniques, right? It's potentially possible to affect in a positive manner scarring, especially scarring from burns. Now, not a whole lot of evidence to support this, but I have seen claims of this where we can improve skin conditions such as eczema, which are very lack of evidence of what that stress is a main cause, but when people are stressed out, they do typically get flare-ups. So it's, it's a weighted bag, but through the combined physiological benefits of stress reduction and parasympathetic activation, it's potentially possible to help alleviate skin conditions like eczema or, nervous hives like anxiety hives or stress hives and stuff like that, right? Of course, we can increase the skin temperature superficially and then improve the flow of blood to the surface of the skin, right? Which then helps just generally contribute to the overall health of the skin as well. The digestive system, again, as we've seen, parasympathetic response, increasing digestive motility through the activation of the parasympathetic system, but the physical force of massage too could aid in the movement of the GI tract, namely the large intestines. Now, of course, there's only a small portion of the large intestines that we are physically able to apply enough pressure to affect, which would be the ascending and part of the transverse colon, but it could be beneficial in GI tract related pathologies like constipation. The physical force could help with the movements. But also some potentially stress perceived onsets of like irritable bowel syndrome and others. Now, a lot of people like to think a lot of the other peptic ulcers are caused by stress, but they're really not. So unfortunately, not every pathology might be stress related, but there are some that potentially could be upset or increased in their severity because of stress. And well, by nature, massage could help reduce all that. So the respiratory system, quite interesting. As we've seen, again, we can lower and change and alter the rate of respiration in the body through parasympathetic engagement. Some studies have suggested that through other various physiological means that we've actually increased the uptake of oxygen in the body, which, oxygen is very necessary in the body. So, of course, we want that oxygen and, feed our brains and feed our cells and everything in the body and makes for good relaxation. There are some studies, there's quite a few studies that show that massage can improve the symptoms of asthma in patients. And namely, I've seen lots of studies conducted on children with asthma and its, benefit towards that. So massage itself, kind of leading into the next bullet point that we see here, aiding in the symptoms of respiratory pathologies like COPD and emphysema. Massage can help the airways too, in the sense of it can relax the airways and allows breathing to be easier, which asthma usually causes restriction. COPD causes restriction, right? And usually emphysema and stuff like that, where we have damage to the walls, right? So this can help and improve possibly the functionality of the walls of the bronchial passageways and upper respiratory passageways as well. To the endocrine system, a lot of things happen here, right? Namely, we have the increase in levels of endorphins, serotonin, dopamine, right, and enkephalins that will contribute to the pain relief, right? That's what our endorphins do, right? They help manage pain relief, improve mood and sleep patterns, right? That's our serotonin. And then a better sense of well-being, productivity too, right? That's our dopamine as well. So, the releasing of those hormones can lead to overall better benefits to the mental health and well-being, right? As we'll see in the next slide. A lot of studies have supported and shown this to be true, that massage lowers levels of blood cortisol, as well as epinephrine and norepinephrine, which all of those are, anti-inflammatories and in high quantities perceived as stressors to the body. Now, they all have a purpose. You should have use of epinephrine, norepinephrine, and cortisol, in positive manners in the body, but prolonged bouts of stress can release these in higher levels, which then causes in turn more stress to the body. So in high quantities, they can be stressors to the body, and so therefore massage can lower those levels, which then in turn would lead to a relaxation effect of the body itself. Now, some studies, while it's inconclusive, have suggested that massage has seen benefits in regulating insulin and glucagon levels through various physiological means, which could then potentially lead to our diabetic friends having some benefit from massage. Not to mention, diabetics could benefit in the sense of, for instance, where peripheral neuropathy, right? We can potentially create stimulation to these areas of lower sensitivity, and then bring a mental awareness, which kind of leads into our next slide, which is the psychological benefits of massage. So like we said, and we say it time and time again, reduction of anxieties, depression, and stress, promoting feelings of well-being and enhanced state of mind. Yes. Again, we've kind of talked on that a lot, but this next one, promote mind-body contact and overall body awareness through stimulation of proprioceptors and other various nervous system receptors. That is where a lot of benefit can come from too. You might have found it to be pretty common that you'll work on your client and they're like, wow, I didn't even know I had that in my body. I didn't even know that part of my body existed, right? It's quite interesting how we sort of lose touch with our body and our spatial and perceptual awareness of it. So that reintegration of mind-body connect can actually be quite beneficial. And essentially, even if just making our clients' nervous system aware of these things, because where there's awareness, there can begin the process of healing. So if my client was just having issues and I worked on some areas and maybe I stumbled upon an area of tense muscle or trigger points or whatever you may want to perceive to be there, and now the client's aware of it, they can now deal with it, either internally or externally. Hyperactivity disorders, which we could also say is a bit of a nervous system thing, but there has been some evidence to suggest that massage can be beneficial to people with hyperactive disorders by reducing the restlessness, right? Balancing out hormones in the body, or especially increasing levels of hormones that would counteract the hyperactivity, such as dopamine, right, which is associated to our focus and attention. So, could potentially be that, that's why, children can really benefit from massage a lot. Now, granted, it's not the same kind of massage that, we as adults might get because we got bodily aches and pains, but it's a different one, right? It's more of a sensory perception and bringing that body awareness and then just increasing the hormones in the body through various means of activity, stretching, and physical touch. So, massage children if you got them. This last one's really cool, kind of hits home here. I think this is a wonderful benefit to massage if you are involved in that population. But there are lots of studies to show that massage can be very beneficial to victims of violence and abuse because, one, of the various physiological responses, right, which is, the hormones and the pain reduction and all these things, right? But namely, it's just creating a safe and nurturing environment that promotes the positive physical contact, right? Because people who are involved with abuse, whether physically, verbally, or whatever, right, their perception of interactions is very skewed. And so, of course, you have to handle these situations lightly, and depending on the severity with the client, be very respectful of, their their mindset. But over time, this could, sort of reprogram, right, the central sensitization of the mind, right, into rewiring and relearning, you know, positive versus negative feedback. So, you know, I think that was a quite an interesting thing. So, and that would be the end of our slide. You know, hopefully you guys did get to learn something. I'll have this video posted for you all. And at this point, you know, I'll leave it to questions.